Joining us in studio for TD's Your Story, Your Future this evening is Vanessa Iarocci. Now, Vanessa is currently on sabbatical and has just completed a big study, the Stanford LEAD program, and you're an executive in residence at the Toronto Rotman School of Business. But we want to hear about this key research study into millennials and money. What did you learn?
Oh, so many things, Kate. It was really fascinating. Just to backtrack, my team was actually made up of folks from all over the world, Russia, Europe, South America, and myself. Mm-hmm. And we interviewed over 50 millennials, and we also observed them interacting with financial advisors.
What were you trying to find out with this study?
Well, it's a good question because we were using a design thinking approach. So we actually were trying to find out what the largest struggles for millennials were. We went into the study without any bias. So we wanted to hear from them about how they were really feeling and thinking about money. And, you know, we learned so much, but maybe I'll talk about what surprised me the most. Mm-hmm. Because as I believe I'm a Gen Xer, Gen Ys and Gen X's, the baby boomers, seem to really think this is a very entitled generation and that they're not interested in money and they're not interested in working hard. But what we learned from them is that, and this was consistent across the world, that many millennials feel that their parents and their financial institutions are letting them down because they don't understand that they face really unique challenges, like having to get over-credentialed or stay in school till age 30 and pay $100,000 for that education. Or, you know, not being able to find a full-time job, having to participate in this gig economy. And, you know, the challenge is buying a first house. So a lot of them talked about the fact that they're actually a little angry that no one is helping them through these very unique challenges.
What kind of help are they looking for?
Well, good question. And I think we all assume this is a generation that are digital natives. So we assume that they want an app, they want an online solution, and that's very true for transactional needs. But what we learned is that where their money was concerned, they still did want a human touch. That was a big aha moment for me because I think I was expecting them to say things like, well, I want the Uber of finances. Mm-hmm. And what they said were things like, you know, this is my money. I'm working really hard for it. I just want to talk to a human who's credentialed, who understands me, who gets my challenges. The other thing that they wanted that was a big aha around financial planning was a solution that was a little more organic. So many of them said, when I think of a plan, I think of something that's very rigid, that applies to a life that involves starting to work at age 25 like my dad, having a pension and working every day until I'm 65, and that's it. And you have a plan that optimizes that scenario. And my life looks very different than that. So how do you help me through that situation? What does planning even look like? Many of them had a very negative association with the word plan because they felt that it boxed them and it suffocated them. They wanted more of an always-on solution.
So what, like the YOLO, the you only live once kind of thing?
And I was showing my age. Everyone kept saying YOLO, so I was writing this down. And finally I asked, like, what the heck is this YOLO? And I thought, wow, I'm really aging myself here. But exactly, one of the millennials we interviewed said, you know, you only live once, and I don't know if I want to spend my entire 30s and 40s just working. I'd rather, you know, be able to take a year off and travel and then work and then travel and, you know, mix it up.
Well, the millennials in my life, one of them was sort of surprised when it came to the end of the university career that it was like, we don't actually, we have to work now. We can't be traveling all the time. That's sort of over. We're going to get 2 weeks a year now.
Yeah, we heard that a lot. The 2-week vacation, that's very shocking to this generation because they've had a decade of extended
school.
So they've had a very different schedule. And you know, many of them said most people don't understand that. And they assume that because I want to travel it means I don't want to work. But then on the flip side, if we look at the median, the kind of jobs we're giving millennials, a lot of them are part-time jobs, projects where you might do 4 projects a year and then have a gap of a month. So, many of the millennials we talked to said, I'm not even getting a shot at getting a regular full-time job. Which is kind of depressing.
This is what I was going to ask you, because you were talking about how they didn't want to get boxed into starting at 25 and working 40 years till 65. And yet, if they look around them at people who are way older, 40s and 50s getting let go, who are looking for something to do, it's a different climate for everybody.
Absolutely. It absolutely is.
And do they understand that?
They do. And, there was an underlying anger that was really interesting because for those, I talked to a few millennials who were in more traditional careers, accounting and law, for example. And I was an accountant, and I remember when I graduated, you sort of picked the firm you went to. I went to PwC, and you were trained, and there was a ladder, and it was all laid out. And as long as you put in, the grind, and you did that grind, you got ahead. But a lot of them said, well, it was really difficult to get a job. I had to go and I had to do like overseas volunteering and I had to get a master's first. So they had to really invest in getting the job. And then they'll say, and you don't get promoted as fast anymore. So why am I doing this at all? Because I don't really see a future for myself. This model is being disrupted. This traditional firm model is being disrupted.
So what about when it comes to women and children, having children?
That's a great question. And as you know, I've done lots of research about women in investing. So I was very curious to know if there was going to be a difference in what the millennial women said versus the young men. Because throughout the course of the program that I had been working on at TD, people often said, well, this is going to all change in the next generation because women and men are going to be the same. But actually what I found is that tension was amplified in the millennial women. They said things like, I can't even imagine how I'm going to make this all work. Like, what happens to my money when I go on maternity leave? Like, do I need an allowance? Like, they'd say things like this. They were actually quite confused. Or, what if, I'm a 30-year-old millennial and I've actually bought an apartment and I've accumulated some assets. So then what happens when I get married? A lot of them expressed lots of tension and frustration and confusion. And what I thought was interesting is that, no offense, gentlemen, the men were totally oblivious to any gender differences when I talked to them. They said, I've never really thought about that. That doesn't worry me.
So what do we as parents or financial advisors, what do we need to change when dealing with millennials?
A good question. I think the first thing is showing a little bit of empathy for the fact that this generation doesn't have it easy. It's not, like an Instagram account where, they're drinking champagne on yachts. They're actually having a really hard time finding their way in the world, and they need some authentic help. So I think listening and helping them plan their finances in a way that works for them is the best thing parents can do, and financial institutions as well.
But then you got to convince them that a financial advisor is worth talking to.
That's a whole other discussion. But a lot of them did say, I'd prefer getting advice from my parents
first. That's good to
They
know.
wanted that social validation.
Just one more question. Are they willing to settle? Because that's always the question for every generation.
Right.
Because you're not going to get exactly what you want.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because there is this classic intergenerational mismatch. So my guess from the interviews would be, yes, they are, but they want a fair shot.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair.
I think so.
Although many people in our generation would say every generation's like that, because my parents said the same thing.
Exactly.
Trying to get a job, and we said the same thing, and then the generations after us.
We forget.
So we all forget that every generation has its own challenges.
Absolutely.
So what's going to happen with this information quickly?
Good question. So I've actually am on sabbatical, so I have the luxury of time for once in my life. So I've been writing it all up into a paper, and we'll see what happens.
Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Vanessa is a special friend of our show, right, Kate?
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is What She Said. Stay with us.